right. Thanks everyone for joining. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is David Dworsky. I'm a product manager here at Retool working on our AI features. We also have Isaac and Max joining us. Isaac works on our support engineering team, and Max is on our sales engineering team working with some of our largest customers implementing AI use cases. So we're excited to walk you through a lot of the features we recently launched, as well as some very tangible demos of how some of our customers are using Retool AI. In the sort of right-hand side, you'll see like a 3-bar icon that has a poll. We have some fun questions in there, like how your company is using AI, et cetera. And once you answer those questions, you'll be able to see the responses from everybody else in the current webinar. So if you have a second, you can go ahead and answer some of those poll questions. And then we'll have Q&A at the end as well. All right. So let's get started. Retool AI launched about 2 weeks ago. It's a faster way to incorporate AI sort of into your business. I'm really excited to walk you through it. We actually started our AI journey with an internal use case, which was basically answering support tickets, specifically the first response, using a large language model. So we started with ChatGPT. We were able to answer a whopping 0% of our support tickets. The reason is that ChatGPT is pretty generic, right? It didn't really know a lot about Retool specifically, and it was a bit out of date. So we didn't get too far with this approach. We then tried some off-the-shelf solutions like our ticketing system provided sort of an AI assistant. There are some other companies in the market that provide sort of plugins to the common support software, but we were only able to answer about 1 or 2% of tickets with those sort of off-the-shelf support bots. And we sort of looked at why this was the case, and we kind of narrowed it down to these reasons. The first one is that these were only trained on our public docs. They didn't have access to sort of a lot of rich internal company information, such as Slack or Confluence, where a lot of our maybe technical documentation actually lives. The second one is that they were fairly rigid. We weren't able to sort of iterate on the prompts and actually sort of experiment our way to the right prompt, given the context of the question. And then finally, we weren't actually able to integrate things like our data warehouse or sort of have custom business logic. Let's say a customer is using our app building product versus our workflow product. We may want to inject different sort of variables into the prompt template. And so these sort of more off-the-shelf tools didn't quite allow us to sort of accomplish these 3 things. And we actually think that Retool is a really good place to do the second 2, right? Retool has a very flexible workflow product. You can write any code, so you can import any Python or JavaScript library, so you can get dynamic prompting. We also connect to any database or API, so you can add custom business logic and sort of bring in data from your core systems. But this first bucket 1, was actually pretty hard to do in Retool. And so we thought about actually sort of building that sort of into the product itself. And so we turned to sort of vector stores, which is sort of a way to provide context to a large language model. The idea is that you can take unstructured text from all of these different systems, whether they're documents or software tools or online websites, store them in a certain type of database called a vector database, and actually sort of provide the right information depending on the question. So we actually built it in-house. We wrote a Python script. This started off as a few hundred lines of code. It became a few thousand lines of code. And the engineer that wrote this spent maybe a few days on it and then had to roll off the project to go back to their sort of core job. And it sort of left our support team with this kind of like half useful thing. It was a Python script that worked, but now we had to actually maintain it and update it and add more sources and change the logic. And it wasn't exactly super easy for our support engineering team to maintain this. So we actually built this primitive directly into Retool. And so now our support bot actually lives entirely in Retool and is powered by something called Retool Vectors, which lets you take text from any website, any document, or any third-party tool, and in a few clicks, you can create what are called embeddings from all of that text. And now you can provide sort of relevant business context with dynamic prompting, other data sources to create things like support bots inside of Retool. And I'm very happy to say that we now have 25% of our of our support tickets deflected on first response, which is a really amazing sort of metric here. Our goal was to land somewhere between 10 and 20% when we started this project. So we're really happy with this, and we think this will only go up over time as we ingest additional sources of information. Taking a step back, for those that are less familiar, Retool is a faster way to build business software. We started with sort of internal tools, but you can now build sort of customer-facing software as well in Retool across web applications, mobile applications, backend sort of logic, cron jobs, API endpoints, and we also have a data storage layer, or we can connect to any API or database internally. And so companies are using Retool to build a lot of their sort of core operational software. You can run Retool either in the cloud or on premise. A lot of our larger customers run Retool, in their own VPC, so everything is within their network. And with Retool AI, we've launched a whole host of features throughout the product. The vectors piece is only one piece, and I'm going to kind of walk you through some additional things that we've introduced to the product as well. Our goal here was really twofold. We wanted to be the best place to actually build apps with AI. So if you want an app built, you should be able to use AI to get that done. But we also wanted you to be able to incorporate AI maybe into your existing apps. So it's less about building an app and it's more about actually building a business process, or let's say you're an insurance company, maybe matching like a claim with a policy. You want to use AI to sort of power that inside of Retool. So starting in the first bucket, we introduced some code authoring tools. So you can write now JavaScript, Python code, GraphQL queries, SQL queries with natural language, and you can accept or reject sort of the proposed query. You can then modify it if it's not 100% correct. And we've seen the acceptance rates here now sort of above 50%, which we're really happy with, and that's inching up every month as we improve the prompt and sort of the context that we give the LLM. And so now users that may not be experts in JavaScript or GraphQL can actually get to their applications much faster by relying on AI. And furthermore, Retool can sort of write code that just works, right, in a Retool app, because it's aware of all the UI components it has to reference. It's aware of your data schema. If you just sort of type this into ChatGPT, it would be a much more generic function that wouldn't necessarily just sort of work inside of Retool. We've also introduced debugging tools, and so now Retool will sort of catch you as you maybe make mistakes in your JavaScript code so that you can get to your final application faster. We've also introduced AI on the UI generation side of things. So here, when a user drags in a table now, we have this indicator called quick actions or predictive actions, where we know based on all of our data that the most common thing next to a table might be a form that is connected to the table's selected row. And so we'll sort of default give you suggestions for things like that, along with a few others that might be the most common next action after dragging in a table component. And this is meant to get builders sort of more in a state of flow so you can build your application and specifically your user interface much faster. We're also experimenting with additional forms of UI generation. So on the left-hand side, you'll see I'm writing a comment inside of Retool, and it's generating the code live, and I can actually see the UI and play with the calculator. On the right-hand side, I right-clicked on the canvas, I gave it a prompt, and it actually gave me 3 different options. If you're familiar with the Mid-Journey UI, where you sort of give a prompt, it shows you like several different images. You can drill down on one and see more similar images. We sort of took inspiration from that and are trying to create sort of a very take advantage of the fast feedback loops in Retool, where you can write language, see it actually in front of you. It actually works. It's connected to your APIs and databases, and then maybe tweak the last 20 or 30% that the LLM didn't catch. So we're experimenting with these. Neither of these are actually released yet, but we're excited about bringing something to market soon that will allow you to sort of build more fully fledged applications using natural language. The second bucket is really about how to integrate AI into your business. So it's less about building apps fast, and it's more about sort of actually using AI to power your own bespoke processes. And so we've introduced this concept of AI actions inside of Retool, where you can do everything from text-based actions like generation, summarization, classification, and extraction, to document analysis, to image generation, to audio transcription. And this is powered by the LLM of your choice. So if you pick an LLM that's image generation, we'll give you all the image actions. If you pick one that's more text-based, we'll give you all the text actions. And you can just plug in your own credentials for that large language model. And we support OpenAI, Azure OpenAI, Anthropic, Cohere, and we're adding sort of the ability to support any on-premise sort of open source model. So if you want to run Llama 2 or Mosaic inside of your VPC, soon you'll be able to sort of connect to that with just entering a few credentials, and you'll get all these AI actions out of the box. We've seen really interesting use cases with AI actions. So here, you're actually seeing someone build an app that extracts images or tags from an image, and then allows you to sort of put those tags back into your product catalog. Here, you're seeing somebody build an app that allows you to take a bunch of PDFs of like field reports of facilities, summarize them, and categorize them as excellent, medium, or critical condition. Here, you're seeing a use case where somebody has a file picker component where they upload a PDF, they drag in our chat component, which we've also released, and they actually build a chat app on top of a document. And so what is really sort of interesting here is, Retool already has all these primitives to build UIs, to build workflows. Now you can just sort of inject AI into all of these apps really easily. And we've seen customers build sort of a really wide range of use cases. In terms of the vector side of things, I sort of talked about sort of the value of vectors. In terms of actually using it in the product, it's really easy now. You just go to Retool Vectors under the Resources tab. You create a vector from a URL, a document, or a website, or actually a SaaS tool like Slack or Confluence. You just click Retool AI, generate text, sort of give your prompt, which will probably come from like a UI component or maybe an input to a workflow. And then you just check this box that says, use Retool Vectors to provide more context to your query, and select all the vector namespaces that you want. Select the model that powers that query, and you'll get a very relevant answer, based on your data. And I actually wanted to show, a quick example of sort of how vectors can really help sort of give a relevant answer. So in this case, on the left-hand side, you're seeing an answer with Retool Vectors, and on the right-hand side, you're seeing an answer without Retool Vectors. So on the right-hand side, it's sort of very generic. It's not actually that specific to Retool. It knows what an OAuth token is. It knows what an API resource is in Retool, but it doesn't actually sort of give me any sort of particularly helpful information. You notice on the left-hand side, it's actually referencing like this very custom sort of variable that we use in the Retool API flow, and it's much more specific to Retool. And the only difference between these two is that the query, has this checkbox down here. And here we're actually giving it all of our GitHub docs and all of our sort of public docs. And then here we're actually not providing that context. And that's the only difference between these two queries. And so, vectors can sort of have a much more high quality answer. And it's really what took our responses on the support side from that 1 or 2% all the way up to that 25% once we were able to sort of vectorize all the right information. So that's a quick overview of Retool AI. And I'm excited now to hand it over to Isaac, who is going to walk through our support bot in more detail.
Thank you. Hi, as mentioned, I am Isaac. I'm a support engineer at Retool, and while I'm not a software engineer by trade, I built an AI-powered support bot that now deflects about 25% of the support tickets it responds to, and I'd like to show you how we did it. So this started originally as a hackathon project. At the beginning,
Hey, Isaac, I think you went on mute for a sec.
Can you hear me now?
All good now. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks. I think it was defaulting to my headset. This is the first time I've used this. Okay, apologies for that. So I was saying this started originally as a hackathon project, and it was providing about 0% of responses. But with the addition of Retool Vectors and the backend, it became so much more powerful. And this is kind of the journey that we took to go from 0% to 25%. We started off by testing out-of-the-box SaaS solutions, and we found, as David said, they were too conservative. They didn't give us the flexibility we needed that Retool does actually provide. So we moved forward with this vectors-based approach, and we started off by testing it internally. So every single response to every ticket that came into support would automatically respond with a note in Intercom, which is our ticketing platform. And the note would be internal only. So we would see it, but customers wouldn't see it, but we would still review everything. And we found that about 70% of responses were helpful. They either helped us internally to help troubleshoot the issue. They might not be customer facing, but they still moved things along quite a bit and gave a lot of impact to the support team. But 70% were useful, but 30% actually were a solution to the problem, even in the early stages. So it was an incredible step up. It also allowed us to identify product categories. So if you've used Retool before, you'll know there's lots of different sections. So we have resources, we have apps, we have workflows, and since we have tickets of all types, we could also see kind of which ones work well and which ones don't, which we could then forward into production and decide which ones we should publicly respond with to customers. So with that, I would like to show you a little demo. If we come out of this. So I guess to start with, some audience participation. If anyone has any questions you want to ask the support bot, now is your time to ask to mention it in the event chat. When the time comes, I will paste it and we'll do a live example. So that'll be in a bit. But first, I just want to show you the workflow. As mentioned, the production version of this uses Intercom. So I'm going to show you the Slack version, just I think because you're going to be more familiar with it. So without further ado, this is a simplified version of our workflow. So if you aren't aware of what workflows are, they are ways of automating tasks. In Retool, you can have your set inputs and you can get your outputs, and they can either run via a webhook or they can run on a scheduled trigger. So here, for example, we have this question input and we have some customer info. So this would be our question from Slack. And you can have this optional check if you want. So in this case, we want to check this customer information and see if maybe they have AI turned off, certain features. And we can add a branch step in the workflow to decide whether or not we want to continue forward or maybe return back an error down here. If we're continuing forward, we generate our response with Retool vectors. It's all nicely in there for us, and we can see the question matches the input here. And finally, we can either return back the response, or in our case, we would have a REST API query that posts a message into Slack. Now, this is just a simplified version, as mentioned, but you can really go to town on this. This is our live production version. We check for retries. We do all this Slack checking. We have all this. You can add like feature flags. So this is a feature flag I'm working on to improve how customers think about writing their questions. And we do all this. This is just some JavaScript that amalgamates everything so that we can have a chatbot, like ChatGPT style conversation. Then we have this asynchronous request, which I'll talk about in a bit, and some formatting and responding back. So there's a lot going on, but it just shows how powerful workflows can be, that I can do this as a support engineer with no experience developing software. So if we come into Slack, do we have some questions? Okay, we do. Let's ask some of these. Can we? I have some up here as well. I'm just going to copy and let's get a couple going at the same time. So it will respond back saying it's thinking, so that customers are aware. I think the response times from GPT used to be a lot longer. It's come a long way. I think it used to be about 3 minutes, and now it's roughly 1 to 2 minutes, depending on the complexity of the question. One other thing to note with this is we can have a chatbot GPT-4 style setup here. So once this responds with its question, I can also ask another question and keep the thread going and have an iterative experience, which isn't necessarily available in like Intercom or other platforms. One other great thing about using Slack to host the support bot is it's scalable. So I could put this into any customer channel, and customers can now use this without needing to reach out to support. They can just ask the question, interact with the bot without having to raise any tickets. And the fact that they can it responds also. Oh, here we go. Holy moly. There's a lot of information here. One other thing to note is depending on where you're posting the response, you can actually format the data differently, and it's quite important because Slack has its own formatting with their own markdown. So let's give that a good response. Excuse me. There's one thing that I think is quite important, is having this feedback loop so that we can identify areas which are good and bad and use that feedback to improve the bot. So let's jump back to the slides. Okay, so what lessons have we learned? This is really important because this is how we've improved our response rate from being 0% to 25%. This is all the things we've learned along the way. So if we start with avoiding hallucinations with prompting, we found a lot of the time doc links would be hallucinated. It would generate its own slug URL. So making sure that you correctly identify hallucinations and tell the bot to not make up information is really important. Also, treating customer input as a source of truth is never good. I think AI is usually pretty confident that input is correct, but especially in Retool, customers get things wrong all the time, and it's important to make sure that we sanitize that input so we get a good output as well. Reducing response variance was a game changer. This was that little JavaScript step I showed you in the workflow briefly. So instead of making one response to GPT, we now make 2 responses at the same time. So concurrent requests to GPT, we get more data back, and then we can deduplicate that data, which means that we're not getting one good output and one bad output every so often. It's just giving a bigger, better output that we can then merge into one bigger and better response. Because before we were seeing times when the same input with the same prompt would sometimes give us a good answer and sometimes give us a bad answer. It's going to double your costs, but it's going to double how good the answer is. What else did we do? We did excluding sensitive data. So you've got to be careful about what vectors you store. So if you're storing sensitive information and you're security conscious, try to make sure that that's excluded from your vectors. Like if you're just pulling everything in from Slack, pulling everything in from Confluence, make sure that either you add prompts to not return that information, or you add or you just remove it from the data source to begin with. Reducing noise is also important. So for context, we use Intercom as our data source, but Intercom by default via API returns HTML, and HTML makes a lot of noise. So we found that when questions were really small, it would pollute the data with, the response would be generated with HTML tags because a lot of the input was HTML. So making sure that you strip all of that back, it's not only going to improve your token usage, but it's also going to mean that you get more accurate results. This is super important. I can't stress it enough. An output is only as good as its input. Customers tend to ask bad questions, even when they're told that they're going to be interacting with AI. Sometimes they'll send screenshots, they'll send one-liners, and it's super important to make sure they're asking the correct questions. Like, for example, in the past, I have seen a customer ask a question, they marked the solution as not helpful. I reworded the same question in a better format and got a perfect answer. So it's super important to make sure that customers are phrasing their questions correctly and giving all of the information, any errors, anything like that. Finally, customers don't want to read long generated answers, we found. Surprisingly, not everyone is happy reading a big wall of text. If you're able to summarize the response, and if you're able to then elaborate on that, if they like the response, it might help. But we found that 30% of our responses are good solutions, but only 25% of customers accept those solutions. So there is some lossage along the way, probably because they don't want to read through the whole thing. So that's something to be aware of. But I guess one thing to, again, bring attention to is all of this testing was only possible because of how flexible the product is and how I was able to just iterate on this without having to go back and forth changing code. So let's discuss the roadmap and where we're going. So currently, we still want to be addressing knowledge gaps. So I was showing you that feedback loop earlier with the plus and minus. What you'll find with the bot is sometimes it will give responses and you know that that's not the correct answer. But if you actually search your documentation, you'll find, oh, the documentation actually doesn't have this information. There's a knowledge gap here, and you can use that as a good feedback loop to improve your documentation. So that's super important. Also, improving customer questions was super important in the past, and it's still something that we need to work on. I still see cases where customers just ask the wrong questions, don't provide all of their information. So one idea I'm thinking of to tackle this is some kind of like thesaurus/dictionary approach, which moderates the input. So you provide a list of technical terms for your product, and then it matches against those and then re-asks the customer, is this correct? And gets them to kind of think about the way they're wording their questions. It looks promising, but again, it's in testing. And finally, the last thing is to scale up to more ticket types and more customers. So right now we're doing a subset of tickets, and we want to expand that out, and we want to give this to everyone. We want everyone to have full access of this. Right now, the Slack bot is only enterprise customers, a couple of opt-in, but we want to roll that out to everyone. But yeah, it's definitely super exciting. So for now, I want to hand you over to Max, who's going to talk about some Retool demos with AI.
Awesome. Thanks, Isaac. And nice to see everyone. I'll quickly go ahead and share my screen here and we can dive right into it. All right. So by way of introduction, I'm Max. I'm a customer engineer that works with our enterprise customers. And one of the things I do most in my day-to-day and that I enjoy most is talking to customers about their AI strategy. So today I'll be walking through two examples, one of which I collaborated with a customer specifically in the retail space on how you can leverage Retool with AI for a retail-based use case. And then I'll also show an example of how I use in my day-to-day on the go-to-market team, Retool AI in my workflow. So jumping into here, and there's kind of three main buckets that we'll go through when we go into the demo. I was working with this customer and they really wanted a way to help AI streamline their workflows, specifically as it relates to tagging of different clothing items, as well as giving products or designers ideas for generating new products for their particular brands. So this demo we collaborated on, and there's three main pillars here that we leveraged. The first is using the AI image actions, so the actions that David had talked about at the beginning of the session today, to help generate product design based on different inputs. So choosing different competitors and seeing what the image that's generated for that particular type of item. The next is using the AI text actions to analyze the product and the description to generate potential tags while still keeping a human in the loop to see those tags and update them. Maybe some of them are accurate, maybe we want to tweak them, but being able to kind of have AI accelerate that workflow, but still keep the human in the loop to validate and add their own context. And then last, we actually use an example of using that AI code generation, the Ask AI, to generate SQL that would be a little bit complex for a user to write themselves, specifically a subquery that partitions based on a country and sees the top products. So with all of that, I'll actually dive into the product itself and we can walk through the demo here. So this is the application that we partnered on. Before diving into this, I want to also set the context. This application is just fully built with all of Retool's out-of-the-box components. So we've just dragged and dropped different components on the page and then leveraged AI within the workflow, which we'll see here. So you can see me analyzing this maybe as a marketing analyst. I'm going in and I see different products that we have in our portfolio. I also see here on the right-hand side some information about my products from a performance standpoint, as well as getting a summary by my different geographies. We'll get into the SQL that powers this, but that's the example SQL that was generated by AI. So on the left-hand side here, I can see my different products. If I want to see more detail on a specific product, I can now navigate to the second screen and see more detailed information, toggle between different images, and see some of those tags that were generated. So let's actually see how those tags get generated in the first place. On the bottom left here, you'll see there's this plus button where I can go in and maybe I want to add a new product from our inventory into our collection and add appropriate tags to it. So I'll go ahead and I'll click this plus button, and you'll see what this has done is it's opened up this side drawer. This is a new a layout type to Retool, where I can then search through my product repository. In this case, I'm searching pants. I can also search things like shorts and have that pop up here. And then once I click on a particular item, I'll go back here to pants, what Retool is doing behind the scenes is it's kicking off a workflow that's running and generating those tags. And we'll get into what that workflow looks like, but it's analyzing both the image of the item and the description of the item. And here you can see all the information as it relates to that particular item. So I can see the SKU, the different colors, the section, the price. And if I minimize that, this bottom part is what was actually generated with AI. So you can see all the different tags that were generated. You can see also in this application, we've identified the ones that were generated via AI. So I can go in and say like, maybe suede actually isn't correct here. I want to add a new tag myself. I can do that. And then if I click this import button, what that's going to do is import that into my environment. And now I can see that here. And maybe this is a repository of all the different items that we've already associated tags to for search engine optimization. So that's kind of the first flow when we're thinking about it more from the perspective of like a marketing analyst or someone on the SEO team to generate tags for the different items in inventory. Thinking about, again, the way that this is accelerated is we're using AI behind the scenes to analyze that description and the image and give us suggested tags before I, as the analyst, confirm those tags. So now taking off the marketing analyst hat for a second and putting on more of like a product designer hat, if I click on this new item that I just added to my inventory, I can see all those different tags that I've identified. Let's say I want to think about maybe there's a different competitor or a different brand, and I want to design a new kind of spin-off of this item to specifically target or look at what other brand may have designed something similar. So on the right-hand side here, you'll see I have this select inspiration, and I have a list of some sample brands here. So if I want to see what these looked like, if they were Gucci pants, for example, if I click this generate button, that's now using our image generation AI action directly here within Retool to generate what are some sample images of some items that would look like Gucci pants in this case. So unclear if all of these would actually match what a Gucci branded one would look like, but I think it's a good illustration of using AI less around kind of process optimization and more in terms of like creative thinking for specifically a product designer. So this could be a way where in a single interface, both the marketing and analyst team, the SEO team, and these product designers are all interacting with product information, inventory information here in one place. So that's a quick walkthrough of the application itself. What I'll actually do now is kind of peel this back, and you can see the different parts of this that are powered by AI. And then we'll get into the other application that I use on the sales team. So this here is what it looks like under the hood for just to orient everyone on the page. That first section is what like an end user of the application would see. This is more of the developer experience, what you'd see when you're actually building out the app. And if you remember the three kind of pillars I talked about that power this application, the first is the Ask AI code generation. So you'll see this SQL query here. It's not the easiest SQL query to write in the sense that it is a subquery and maybe not something that you know necessarily how to write to partition by, let's say, country in this case. So if I pop over here to this summary tab, this is actually where we're leveraging or seeing the results of that query. And you can see this is the prompt that I've put in, and I can either accept or reject that. So this is a good example of how you can use Ask AI to write potentially complex SQL or complex JavaScript directly in the application itself. So that's a kind of the Ask AI code generation side of things. Then when we talk about, there's two different pieces or AI pieces that you saw in there. The first, or one of them was around creating sample products based on the input of a different competitor. So if I pop over here to let's say here in product details, you'll see this generate image. We're just leveraging the Retool's built-in OpenAI integration here on the Retool provided key. But you can see you can put any sort of input here, and I'm actually passing in the details of the item that I've selected, the description, designed by, and this is the drop down for the different competitors, and then the color being whatever the color is of that item. So we can continue to tweak and iterate on this prompt. And I think that's one of the nice things with Retool here is you can see what that prompt, what the output looks like, and continue to change and tweak it here in real time based on what we see as that output. So this is what we're using to generate the other product ideas. And then the last thing is that generate tags or generate SEO here. And instead of that being kind of built in directly here into the app, what that's actually doing is kicking off a workflow. And just to show you very quickly what that workflow looks like, you can see it here's where it is, and it's doing just a few different things. It's getting information from like an API. Maybe this is an API you have internally about the product that you've selected when I clicked on that particular pair of pants. It's then using, in this case, it's calling the Google Vision API, but a key part of this, it can be any API that you have internally. It can be one of the ones that we provide the OpenAI credentials that way. It can really be any kind of API endpoint that you want here. In this case, we're using Google Vision to generate different labels and apply it to that particular image. And then at this step, we're actually combining the data that we're getting from that first API call, the details, the description of the item, and the labels that we get from the actual image analysis via the Google Vision API here to create these different tags, and also to format it a specific way where I can then, using some JavaScript here, format it further and then log it and then send it also back to the front end to be used in the application. So this is what gets called when I click on that particular pair of pants. And again, this is something that you can iterate quickly on. You can make this more complex. You can build in different rules based on types of products, things like that. But this is how we're actually generating those sample tags. Cool. So that's really it on the retailer use case. The other thing I wanted to quickly show, and we'll go back here, is so that's kind of how I work with customers all the time, but also I use this type of stuff internally as well for my personal day-to-day, as well as for my sales counterparts. So one thing, whoops. So one thing that we've noticed, and personally, I spend a lot of time in Salesforce in my day-to-day, the general process for like adding notes or updating Salesforce requires someone, whether it's me or my sales counterparts or other people on the team, to consolidate information from a variety of different sources, whether it's taking notes on a Zoom call, using Gong, or using Google Drive, different notes that you've already collected, using our internal Confluence to say, like, what are the different key areas that we're looking for to record in Salesforce, things like budget, authority, need, and timeline, which we'll see in the demo. And then actual Salesforce information itself, like the contacts, the context of the account, et cetera. And it's on the person to kind of consolidate all that info and manually go into the Salesforce UI and enter that themselves. So that's kind of what it used to be. What we now do with Retool is leverage inputs coming from different endpoints. So again, like Gong, Salesforce, Google Drive, other different places. Retool connects natively to those different sources to query the data and surface it up to the end user on the sales team. And we have these different vector embeddings, specifically information from our Slack, from Google Drive, and from Confluence around those kind of key areas that we're looking for in Salesforce notes to programmatically generate BANT, budget authority need timeline, for the user to then validate and then just click a button to actually update that directly in Salesforce. So no longer needing to manually consolidate all this information, but let Retool AI via the Vectors product parse out the key pieces of information, service it up to the salesperson, and then allow them to directly write that back to Salesforce. So what that looks like, and I'll quickly jump into the demo here. This is an example of that. So you can see on the left-hand side, think of this like different accounts and maybe filter specifically to me as an account executive. What are my different accounts and information about them? I can see I have information about the transcript here itself and the different calls. And then what I'm able to do is I can actually just generate that budget, authority, need, and timeline, which are the key pieces that are coming from that we store in our Confluence around what are the things we're looking for as far as a deal cycle. And then I can validate those things. It looks all great. And then I can actually just send that off directly to Salesforce within this application instead of needing to copy and paste or manually upload this to different places. So that's just one example of how I use Retool in my day-to-day, specifically powered with Retool AI under the hood to do that summarization and the vectors product to know what are the different key areas to look for. That's it from my section. From there, I'll kind of stop my share and we can jump into more of a Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you, Isaac and Max. Amazing demos. Let's jump into the Q&A. So we've written down all the questions that were asked in both Q&A and chat. So we'll just go through some of them now. Robbie asked, would it be possible to pull in sort of Zendesk data into the vector database, and how would you approach that? So we have some workflow templates for like Slack, Confluence, and a few other sources. We could definitely build a Zendesk one. We'll be putting those in our public docs over the coming weeks. If you'd like to get access to those sooner, you can always email me, email us. I'll drop my email here. And we can send you like the workflow templates for some of the other SaaS systems, and we can certainly build a Zendesk one. We're also looking at building more native integrations, so that it'll be more one click in the future. All right, how would you use Retool AI to create a chatbot available in our product? So if you want the chatbot sort of outside of a Retool application, this is where workflows can kind of really help. Like the workflow that Isaac showed you is actually being triggered by intercom, and so the response from the workflow actually shows up in intercom. You could easily have your own code base sort of call the workflow endpoint, which is sort of how you could use Retool more inside of your product. We also have Retool Embed, which allows you to embed Retool UIs inside of your product as well. A lot of companies use that for like admin screens and more sort of administrative screens inside of their product. They can build Retool apps and sort of embed those as well. All right. Next question is basically, can you talk about the cost of LLMs? Today, we do recommend sort of entering your own API key. So your cost for the LLM will just be governed by your relationship with OpenAI or Azure, or whoever you're using behind the scenes. We don't charge for any of these AI features. They're included in all the tiers of Retool. And we treat the AI vendors like we do any other resource, whether it's an API or a database. So you can bring your own key and sort of connect to any model that you'd like. Great question here around sort of customizing the vector process of actually taking raw text and creating vectors out of them, as well as retrieving those vectors. Today, we sort of handle a lot of that magic for you, but we're sort of as a fast follow going to be incorporating a lot more control there. So you'll be able to control things like chunk size and chunk overlap. You can control these today if you hop into the Workflows product and write sort of raw code to actually interact with Retool vectors. But if you just want to use the like out of the box screen to sort of one click create the vectors, we sort of do a lot of that for you. But we'll be adding an advanced panel where you can control things like chunk size, chunk overlap, etc. Similar on the retrieval side, it's all stored like in a raw sort of vector database. So you could just query the database directly, via a Retool query and sort of control all the parameters that you send there. But by default, we use sort of a similarity search and return all the vectors in order, by similarity, concatenate as much context as we can into the context window and sort of send that response. So we have sort of an opinionated way to do it by default, but you're of course able to sort of dive in and sort of control that if you're willing to write a little bit more code. Good question here about handling user questions that include both text and image. This is quite common in Retool. Retool is a very visual product. A lot of our customer support questions come in with images or screenshots. Today, we are not parsing those. There are some interesting things on the horizon, like OpenAI is exploring some multimodal models. Azure has some image recognition models. So we have considered sort of exploring these, but we haven't done too much there yet. I think part of the challenge there is the images are very Retool specific. So we'll explore both sort of, having a library of those images that we can actually label, but also just using sort of off-the-shelf endpoints. So I would say that that is unsolved today. Another question about sort of incorporating good and bad feedback into the bot. I know, Isaac, actually, you worked a lot on sort of curating sort of examples of good and bad questions, I think, in your own database, if you want to take a stab at that one.
Yeah, so this is kind of a new thing that we added into the support bot. For the time being, we're manually reviewing these, so this runs a separate workflow in the background. If you know much about Slack API, when you click on an action, it can be used to generate a webhook. So that webhook we've linked up with a workflow, and that workflow adds all of the relevant context into a database, which means that we can go through and manually check each one, work out why it was a bad response, and use that to improve and plug gaps with documentation and stuff like that.
Great. Can you use a database or a GraphQL? Yeah, so basically can vectors be accessed via API? Today, they cannot, but we will be releasing that sort of in the near future. Today, they're actually stored in Postgres using PG vector extension, which is powered by Retool database, which is like a database that you get inside your Retool account for free. So we'll be exposing like the raw tables. You can write SQL across them, but we also want to expose an API as well over time. Someone else asked, can you bring your own vector database? Certainly, Retool has like a REST connector, so you can connect to, Pinecone, Chroma, Weaviate, any vector database that you already have, and sort of call that from Retool. We'll also be building more native integrations with these other vector databases, so that you can use the more sort of out-of-the-box, one-click features that we've built into Retool. There's a question about open source models. So yeah, as I mentioned, we support a few models out of the box, but we do want to very quickly get to a world where you can bring your own model, sort of regardless of where it's hosted or what the model is. And so we'll be sort of supporting some out of the box, like Llama 2, but we'll also be enabling you to connect basically any open source model that you're running inside of your cloud to Retool. This is especially relevant for a lot of our larger customers who don't want their data sort of leaving the VPC. All right. I think we got through a good amount of the questions there. So yeah, thank you all so much for coming today. A few closing remarks here. So you'll receive a recording of this webinar shortly. You can get started with Retool AI for free today. It's just retool.com/AI. And you can also book a demo with our team. This is a great opportunity to sort of walk through your own use cases. So for example, the question about vectorizing Zendesk, like we can work with you to build sort of a workflow template that does that. So it's just one click for you. So yeah, thank you so much for joining, and hope you're able to learn something today about Retool AI. Thanks.